This is the BearCast, presented by Bird Culture Ford. Bird Culture Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The BearCast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
Welcome into the BearCast here on Sikkim365.com, 365 Sports on this Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. Been a while since we've been with you, it feels like, but we are back and on remote at our respective locations. I'm Craig Smoak. Feel like I have to reintroduce myself for the first time in a really long time, to be honest with you. Joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer, Director of Broadcasting for Sikkim365.com. Got Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well, and we're with you for the next hour or so to run down all things Baylor athletics, which means some basketball this time of year, and we'll also see what's going on with the football team as spring practices should be starting here at some point in the near future, but no word exactly yet on exactly when that will start up, but we will get to that as well. And so, yeah, here we are, and feels like a reunion or something. Grayson, been a while, man. How you doing this week?
Doing good. Yeah, it's been a little off and on for us. Obviously, we'll get back in the groove as the spring season starts to roll around, especially as spring football gets going. Definitely excited about that. We haven't gotten a specific date yet, but typically it is that third Tuesday in March, which would be the 18th this year. That's typically when it has been, at least over the course of the last 3 years. So I don't know why much would change there, but we'll see on that. We should get word on that, I would think, this week, but we'll see as they kind of figure things out and figure out, exactly what they're going to do with this spring schedule. As we've seen from schools across the country, spring games are kind of becoming a thing of the past. So we'll kind of see what Baylor decides to do on that front. But it is a very interesting time period as we kind of get ready for that. I know it's a very exciting time period as well for Baylor fans as you kind of get ready for this team that has a lot of expectations, a lot of hype, I would say, going into this spring football period. So I think there's a lot of excitement about that, especially with kind of how the basketball season is going.
Yeah, basketball not going great. I mean, let's go ahead and just start there and dive right into it. Wow, this team's been a roller coaster ride from the very beginning, and fortunately, we're able to talk about a win. But it's looking like we're going to go a couple of weeks without being able to do that. A 3-game win streak, losing streak snapped finally this past weekend by the Bears as they were able to take down Oklahoma State 71-61 as Jeremy Roach put up 21 for the Bears to help lead them to victory. And it was much needed after that 3-game skid that saw losses to Arizona at home and then back-to-back just atrocious losses to Colorado and to Cincinnati. I mean, really just can't have them, can't lose to these teams. And you lost to both of those schools back-to-back following that Arizona loss. So 3 in a row, and then finally they get that Oklahoma State win they desperately needed. There are 2 games left to play now. You've got TCU coming up tonight at home or at their place up in Fort Worth, and then you've got Houston coming to town on Saturday. The number 3 ranked Cougars, the Big 12 champions, already locked that up after this past weekend. They will be in town at the Foster Pavilion on Saturday night for a late tip-off. That's all that's remaining. 2 games tonight and Saturday. And as it stands right now, look at the latest bracketology, Grayson. I mean, they're still in. Was it Lenardi yesterday, I think, had his latest, and they were in. But, man, they are clinging on. It feels like in some ways these last few days to almost flirt with how close they can get to missing the tournament, it feels like. Playing with a little bit of fire. But as of right now, still in the tournament, 2 games left to play, the Big 12 tournament. It's been a couple weeks. How are you feeling about Baylor men's basketball right now?
Not great. I mean, I don't know how you can really be feeling great about this team. I will say, it's nice to see Jeremy Roach finally have a really good scoring game. He only has 2 20-point games this year. The other one came against St. John's, which obviously was a huge win for them. He had the big shot at the buzzer to win that game as well. But, man, it's just been a disappointing year for him. But, I mean, if he can get going and actually build some momentum off of that, that really changes this team. I mean, if he is able to score at this level, now he hasn't done it all year, so I don't know why we would expect that all of a sudden he's going to get on this hot streak, but crazier things have happened in March. So we'll see what happens. Maybe he has a great March and flips things around. Yeah, you mentioned bracketology. So I had a little bracketology article that I put up, I guess yesterday. And the consensus right now, Baylor pretty much on every metric is a 9 seed or a 10 seed. That's been the most common pick. The only one that has them kind of, really on the bubble, truly on the bubble, is CBS, which actually has them in the play-in game as an 11 seed right now. So like you mentioned, I mean, you go into this week, if they lose to TCU tonight, and then they turn around and just let's lose to Houston, which is probably going to happen. If they lose those 2 games, I truly think they're probably going to have to win at least 1 Big 12 tournament game, probably 2 Big 12 tournament games, depending on who you get to play in that setting. So, I mean, just looking at it kind of like that, I mean, their season may hang in the balance tonight when they take on TCU, a TCU team that came into Foster Pavilion, upset Baylor. In a lot of ways, they outplayed Baylor, out-physicaled Baylor, out-tough Baylor. And now you get an opportunity to go on the road and kind of get some revenge there in kind of a must-win situation for yourself. And I'm very curious if they rise to that challenge, rise to that occasion. TCU is not a horrible team, but they're not a team that's anywhere near the bubble right now. They would probably have to win the Big 12 tournament to get in to the NCAA tournament. So it's not really a team that you should lose to. But it's on the road, and it is kind of a toss-up game. I think Baylor's a 3-point favorite right now, 3.5, something along those lines. So they're really going to have to play well if they want to kind of get some momentum before March starts and honestly cement themselves in the tournament. I think based on kind of how projections look and where Baylor is at, I do think that if they win this game against TCU, I think they're in, regardless of what happens against Houston, regardless of what happens in the Big 12 tournament. I think they are in the field. If they lose these 2, they're going to have to win at least 1, probably 2 in the tournament. And then, of course, if they lose the TCU game, win the Houston game, they're in. If they win both these games, they're in. So they do definitely control their own destiny. But I think a couple weeks ago, we probably would have been it would have been crazy to think that they're fighting for their lives to kind of get into the tournament. But when you lose to Colorado and Cincinnati the way that they did, these are the things that happen. And now you can find yourself in a really tough position. And when you're kind of up and down like they have been all year and inconsistent, it can lead to some losses that aren't good. And I would consider the Cincinnati game a not good loss. I would consider the Colorado game a bad loss. In my vantage point, I know you can look at different metrics and say, oh, it's a top 100 loss or whatever. That's a team that had 1 Big 12 win coming into that matchup. So in fairness, that's a game that I just think Baylor should have won, regardless of, what the Q1, Q2 rankings say.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who doesn't like go gaga over college basketball, like I know a lot of people on our site do, and like, hey, that's great. It is funny to me sometimes, like how you can talk yourself into like really crappy losses, like, oh, it's not that bad. It's like the quad 1 and the quad, and it's like, dude, that's just a bad loss. Like, I mean, I understand it's all about the tournament and getting into the tournament and all that, but like sometimes it just is what it is, and it's like just it doesn't matter how it affects your seeding. It's like they're just playing bad basketball, man. Like, beat them wherever you want to. They're going to be out of this joint in real quick fashion the way they're playing right now, and that's how it feels, man. I mean, they're in the tournament. Lenardi had them as a first 4 bye, is what he had them listed as of yesterday. So yeah, I mean they're still in right now, and they have their path that you just laid out that should get them in. But man, if they don't play better, they're going to be real quick out of the Big 12 tournament. They're going to be really quick out of the March Madness tournament. Just what do you make of this team? And we kind of talked about in the fact that Jeremy Roach is at 2 20-point games. I mean, that is not what you paid for this offseason. So there's a big old miss right out of the gates. Just a lot of like, I think, reflection going on right now with the Baylor basketball fan on, what does the future hold? And the present's still obviously active as well. But there's a lot of discussion, I think, surrounding the program at the moment. Just kind of how do you feel about, what you see just in general and kind of the direction they're heading at the moment?
I mean, I think for me, I do believe that they're going to have to do some soul searching this offseason. I think Scott Drew is going to have to change a lot of the things that they kind of put in for this season. I know people look at the last 2 seasons and say, oh, they had a an early exit in the tournament and whatnot, but those were still really good teams. Like they were really, really good. And they just ran into, whether it was a matchup problem or a hot team. I mean, Clemson ended up being a hot team. We saw with that team that lost to North Carolina. I mean, that team made it all the way to the championship. So I think there is some bad luck in there, but I think in general, those teams were constructed well. Like they really were. And I think us talking about them having problems in the tournament is probably the discussion that we should be having more times than not. But this year, it's very different. This year's team is just they're not bad because they really aren't. Like comparing them to other teams across the country, they're not bad, but they're not the level that Baylor has kind of grown accustomed to. And the kind of rosters that Scott Drew has built, I think a lot of it has come down to depth. I just don't think they assembled a roster that had the necessary depth. I think that will be addressed this offseason. They don't have enough size and athleticism on the wings and in the post. That's been another big problem. And so that's impacted them defensively. Those teams that had, a Jeremy Sohan and a Kendall Brown and those teams that we've seen in the past that have always had length really at Baylor, whether it's a Mark Vidal or even the team with Maceo Teague, they were so good offensively, but you forget just how many good individual defenders they had. This year's team does not really have good individual defenders outside of VJ, and he's a freshman. And so I think in general, there's just a lot of changes that need to be made. And I think they will be made for this team to, again, get bigger, more athletic, become a deeper team, and then probably utilize the NIL maybe in a different way because of that, going out and finding more depth pieces instead of just, trying to get two guys in. They're difference makers like they did this year, in which they hit on one in Norchad Omier, who's been a double-double machine, basically what he has been his entire career. I think they've kind of done a disservice to him by not having a good center next to him and not having length on the perimeter. So it kind of makes him look not as good because he's not really a rim protector. That's not really what his job has ever been in college. So sometimes he doesn't look great, but I think you're getting what you paid for with him. You're getting the double-double. You're getting the offensive consistency. But then you look at Jeremy Roach and they just missed. And I truly think, Craig, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If Jeremy Roach was averaging like 18 points per game this year, I feel like this is probably a top 4 seed, top 5 seed type team. Like I really do believe that, because if he was consistently scoring and then you get these explosive games by VJ or Rob, I think this season is just totally different. And so we can look at it in a lot of different ways. I still don't think this would have been an elite team, but they would have been far better than they have been so far this year. And that's not even talking about the injuries to Josh O and of course, Langston Love.
Yeah, Jeremy Roach, not going to dwell on it, but certainly not having lived up to kind of the expectations of the offseason when you get this big name from Duke. And, maybe some of that was telling when there was Duke fans were like, all right, well, good luck to them or whatever. And now in hindsight, you're like, well, maybe they didn't go crazy for a reason. But no, just, that's a move that clearly has paid off for him, but has not paid off for Scott Drew and company the way that they expected. So yeah, two big money pieces, and one of them not quite living up to the expectations. On Lenardi's bracketology, the way it was set up right now for Baylor, I mentioned first 4 buys. That has them as the 10th seed versus Memphis out in the Midwest region, which would place them in Raleigh to start things off with. They'd be in the same bracket or the same town is hey, you beat Memphis. How about you want to go play Alabama next? Because that's how it would line up. The Alabama versus South Alabama, the 2 versus the 15. So that's kind of where they find themselves now, of like where they're going to be seated. They could very well, hey, you make the tournament, but then we know that first game's no guarantee based on the last few years. And then that second game, the lower the seed you are, the higher you're looking at in that next round potentially. So yeah, if it's sort of play out exactly like this, then Memphis is no guarantee, but then Alabama would be problematic to say the least.
Right, and where they're sitting,
this is just one of many, obviously, but it's the latest from ESPN.
Yeah, and Bracket Matrix, which takes into account like 50 different websites and their bracket predictions. Currently, Baylor is at a 10 seed, and they're like the second 10 seed team. So they're kind of right on that fence of being a 9 seed. Again, I think if they beat TCU, they probably move up to the 9 seed line. And then we kind of see what happens from there. It's interesting because you look at paths to actually trying to make a run in the tournament. You kind of almost want to be like an 11 or a 12 seed more so than you probably want to be a 10 or a 9 seed. But obviously that's not what they're looking at right now. They're just looking at trying to find a way to make it into the tournament. Big game tonight against TCU, a team that, of course, beat them earlier in the year. So we'll see if they come out ready and can kind of try to clinch, in my eyes at least, clinch an NCAA tournament berth, which, again, I think if they win tonight, they probably would do that. I think their resume would be good enough regardless of what happens the rest of the way.
Yeah, it should be. The fact that it's even a conversation point, though, is kind of interesting because you never expected it to be this close, probably this late to talking about, no, not what seed you're getting, but are you making the tournament to be certain? And the answer is right now is yes. But again, lose tonight and you make things very, very interesting. And TCU won their last game this past weekend against UCF. After having suffered a couple of losses to Cincinnati and West Virginia, they get Baylor and then Colorado on the road to close things out. So they got a chance to finish strong if they have their ducks in a row. So yeah, TCU and Baylor later on tonight in Fort Worth, and that is a 7:00 tip-off, and obviously a very important game for your Baylor Bears to try and solidify themselves. Any thoughts on just entering the tournament, the Big 12 tournament right now? Like they're right there in the middle of kind of everything that you look at, but just thoughts on the league. And right now, I mean, it's very clearly the SEC's world. Everybody's just sort of living in it nationally. They're going to get 12 plus spots in the tournament. Big 12 right now, based on the bracketology, looking like they're going to get about 8 spots. I don't think it's necessarily been a down year for the league. It's just that the SEC's had such an amazing year that it kind of puts everything else to shame. But Houston, Tech look like contenders. Obviously, you run into them in the tournament, you're going to have your work cut out for you. But do you feel like this is a team that can go, no matter what happens the rest of this week, a team that can go to the conference tournament and maybe make a little bit of noise?
No, I don't have a lot of confidence in that. I think maybe they can win one. I just think we've kind of looked at the top of this league, especially this is the hard part about the Big 12 this year. Houston's going to go 19-1 or something like that. And so we haven't really seen that. Maybe if they lose to Baylor, but they're 18-1 right now.
Oh, I thought they had 2 losses. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but the bigger part about that is that took away, what if West Virginia had beaten them in Morgantown? Then West Virginia's clearly a tournament team. If Baylor, beats them in Waco or whatnot, that just hasn't happened this year to give other teams kind of bigger quad 1 wins. Whereas you look at the SEC, there's been a lot more opportunities for that. I think also part of it is how well they did in the non-conference that really set the table for them to have just this, gauntlet of an SEC schedule, and also just have, a ton of bias from the national media with how many ranked teams that they have. I still think the Big 12 is really good. I still think Houston is a team that can absolutely win a national championship, make the Final Four, do all of those things. I'm not sure any other team in this league, though, I think can really actually compete for a national championship. I don't see any other team making a Final Four push this year, and that's just kind of where it has been with the Big 12. Whereas in past years, I felt like you could probably name 2 or 3 teams every year that you were like, they for sure have an opportunity to make it to a Final Four. At least you feel good about their chances if they get the right path.
Yeah, Houston does look very good. Texas Tech's obviously got a pretty good team. They could make some noise. Arizona, right now that's your top 3. But yeah, beyond that, I don't think you're going too crazy for anybody, especially with Kansas being as down as they've been this year. That's been very interesting to see. And yeah, we'll see what kind of noise can be made in the tournament. But as it stands right now, Houston, Texas Tech, Arizona, feel good about those schools, primarily Houston. Iowa State, BYU, Kansas, as much as they struggle, they're still a game above the Bears. Baylor right there at 9-9, man. So whoever wins the TCU game tonight's going to be ahead of the other in the standings. So you're either solidifying your spot above TCU or you're dropping below them and going down another notch. But yeah, then there's just a lot of noise beyond those schools. Just a lot of teams with, a couple handfuls of wins, but not much separating them. And Baylor's kind of in that midst as well.
Right. The only other team on the bubble truly right now is West Virginia. TCU's not on the bubble yet. They still have a lot of work to do. Kansas hasn't dropped to the point where they're on the bubble. I don't think they will, regardless of how they finish. It's really just Baylor and West Virginia, and Baylor has the better resume by quite a bit right now, but we'll see how this last week kind of plays out.
Yeah, and K-State's been a struggle for them this year. I mean, actually made up some ground to make it
Yeah.
interesting, but not a great year for the Wildcats. So they'd be outside looking in right now. So Baylor feeling good about their spot, but again, just not feeling good in general, I think, about things. But just win tonight, man, and like just knock that out of the way, and then sleep good tonight, and feel great about going into this weekend and not having to get a win to salvage yourself in any way. So there you go with the Baylor men, and game coming up later on this evening, trying to hold on to their spots in the tournament with 2 games to play, and then the conference turning to follow. Meanwhile, the Baylor women disappointing finish of the regular season, home against TCU this past weekend, a chance to win the Big 12 regular season championship, and the Bears fall short to TCU. Grayson, really ugly game. Not an offensive clinic by any means. Very poor shooting by the Bears. Sort of doomed them in this one. Not great basketball to watch, let's be perfectly honest, and really disappointing coming off of a long win streak. I mean, nearly 10 wins in a row for this Bears team. And then this matchup with TCU, 51-48. Sounds awfully close to another score that we often repeat when talking about TCU, but this one not in favor of the Bears. So that snapped a 9-game win streak, and also took away their opportunity to win the Big 12 regular season. But yeah, 51-48 in Waco this past weekend. They've been playing good basketball. I think a lot of people have come around to Nikki Collin and just kind of respect her ability as a coach, but that was not it this past weekend, and that was a disappointing showing, a disappointing finish against the arch rival Frogs.
I mean, I think this is a really good TCU team, so I just want to make sure that we put that out there. I know it's a loss, and you never like to lose. You never like to lose at home, but TCU is a top 10 team. Like that, they're a really good team this year. They have a lot of really good pieces, and I think you kind of saw that their 2 superstars really carried them in this game with Haley Van Lith and then Sedona Prince, and so losing to this team, I don't think is like, wow, this is crazy that they lost to him. But it is one of those things where it's like, man, you had an opportunity to win the Big 12 championship outright. You had an opportunity to kind of really cement, Nikki Collin as her, during her time as the coach at Baylor. Like this would have been her biggest win and an opportunity to really kind of regain that dominance in the Big 12. And you lose to a TCU team that I don't think's won the conference championship since the WAC days, I think is what they were saying. And so that's really unfortunate to lose in that way, especially because I just felt like this was just a game where Baylor just didn't play well. They couldn't find an opportunity to get anyone open on the 3-point line. I know they didn't make many, but they were also taking really tough ones. And TCU's game plan was essentially they were going to allow Baylor to drive to the rim as many times as they wanted to, but they weren't going to help off 3-point shooters. And Baylor just didn't make enough shots in the paint and didn't do enough in that regard to win this game. I think it's just one of those things where it's this huge moment, this huge opportunity, and they just didn't quite get it done. And it had a lot riding on it. I mean, they win this game, and then they win the Big 12 tournament. I mean, Baylor could have been looking at like a 2 seed or a 3 seed at least, something along those lines. Now Baylor's kind of going to be fighting to just try to host the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament. So it ends up kind of being that double-edged sword, and now Baylor's got some work to do in the Big 12 tournament to be able to host.
Yeah, TCU is good and all, but yes, I think you kind of laid it out there. Very disappointing. The opportunity that you missed out on. You're a pretty good team. It's got a good group of players that will be moving on, and very disappointing no matter how good your opponent is because there's a missed opportunity. And as you said, you win that game and then follow it up, and you're looking at jumping up some seeds, but instead right now, they get the title and you lose to your rival and you miss out on that opportunity. So yeah, that's a bummer. But you're now looking at a 5 seed and playing Middle Tennessee out in Tuscaloosa, which would match you up with Alabama, Missouri State's winner. And that's just the pull from ESPN on their latest bracketology. But yeah, they have Baylor as a 5 seed, and we'll see what other places that could potentially take them. But for example, this one has them in Tuscaloosa. So yeah, missed opportunity to maybe better your positioning there. But yeah, could not get it done. Could not get it done, particularly offensively against the Horned Frogs, and they're good. They obviously spent some NIL money to get a Haley Van Lith and Sedona Prince and all her baggage and what she brought with her, but. I guess it was worth it because you won the Big 12 championship. So I guess that investment paid off for you to some extent. And yeah, the women fall just short. But I think you like the direction that Nikki Collin has them going in right now.
Definitely. And I mean, they didn't have Little Paige Bugs in this game as well. And so I'm curious if they get her back. I think that would have helped them immensely in this game. Unfortunately, obviously, she wasn't there. Now, on the flip side, we talked about the men's potential path. We don't have a bracket yet for the men, but I feel pretty confident in saying I don't see them going past, winning one game in the Big 12 tournament. On the women's side, there's a path here for Baylor to make it to the Big 12 championship game. When you look at their tournament layout, they're likely going to play Iowa State in their first round game. Iowa State's playing the winner of Arizona State and Cincinnati. Then after that game, Baylor's probably going to play Oklahoma State. Could be Utah as well, but Baylor gets to avoid TCU, West Virginia, and Kansas State, who are really, really good opponents. And so I think this Baylor women's team can go on a run here, potentially make it to the Big 12 tournament championship, potentially win that whole thing. I really think that is potentially in the cards for them. And if they do that, I think they will be locking up a regional host. And if they're able to do that, then you're looking at pretty confidently making it to a Sweet 16, or at least you should feel really good about your chances to make it back there. This is a big tournament for this Baylor women's team. I expect them to come out and kind of give everything they have to try to cement themselves as a regional host, because obviously in women's basketball, that's a just massive advantage to have home court advantage for your first two games.
Yeah, it is. So that's a good thing. This team does have a chance to go make a little bit of a run, like you're saying. I've enjoyed watching them at times this year. Definitely disappointing to not win the Big 12 whenever you have a shot at that, because that can just be fleeting. But I do think you like their chances to continue to make some noise moving forward. So, yeah, we'll see with the Big 12 women's tournament starting up. And what do you have here? Just had the schedule in front of me. So you got Friday is when they would be playing quarterfinals versus the winner of Iowa State versus the winner of Cincinnati and Arizona State, I think is correct. So you got to watch Cincinnati and Arizona State coming up on Wednesday. Winner of that will go play Iowa State on Thursday, and then the winner of that will play Baylor on Friday. And so that's how that will work out. And that game on Friday will be at 5:30 on ESPN Plus. Semifinals on Saturday if they make it that far. Finals would be on Sunday if they're able to make it that far. But yeah, they're sitting back, and the possibilities are Iowa State versus who did I say? Cincinnati, Arizona State. Those are the three possibilities that they could play. Coming up on Friday.
Iowa State, but yeah,
probably Iowa State. So that's something you can look forward to this weekend, and then we'll know a lot more about them after the conference tournament and getting close to Selection Sunday for everything to start falling into place here.
Yeah, and truly, you kind of want Baylor to face the better teams because Iowa State has a chance. I think they're in the tournament right now. So beating another tournament team, and then if they get to play Oklahoma State, another team that's kind of right in the area that they're in, getting those kind of wins are huge, right, for your tournament resume. It's not as big if you beat a 15 seed or a 10 seed that's nowhere near making the tournament. So you're kind of hoping that Baylor does face a couple tough challenges, and then they're able to rise to the occasion and actually win those games.
Yep. So that's where the Bears are on the women's side of things, awaiting their opponent for the Big 12 tournament. So they sit back and just practice and stay healthy and get healthy and do all those things. And then be ready when the time comes to try and make some noise to better their standing in the conference tournament coming up this weekend. So there's a little bit of basketball. It's conference tourney in March time, and just a couple more regular season games for the men, but both teams should be in the post. I mean, the women are going to be in the postseason, but the men should be in the tournament as well. But as we talked about at the beginning, don't want to play with fire too much tonight and risk that at all. But we should be watching some postseason basketball across the board. So there's that with hoops. A few more things to figure out, and then the dance. And then on the football side of things, Grayson, we talked about spring football. Don't have an exact date yet. But we're getting close to whenever that typically would kick off. Pretty quiet for the most part. I know there's been Keenan Hall, I think you want to talk about, seems to always be involved in something or another, it feels like. So I don't even know, but I know Texas hired their their running backs coach. And so whatever actual attention was being paid there, or whatever kind of feelers were put out, or whatever attention was being paid, Keenan Hall is going to be staying in Waco. And so there's one thing, I guess, that's less of a worry at this point. But what else out there football wise? And I guess in regards to that, did you want to highlight this week?
That's obviously a big storyline. Texas ended up hiring Chad Scott from West Virginia. Kind of a bit of an underwhelming hire. It kind of fits what I think, maybe they were looking for as far as someone that can recruit the East Coast. Because when they lost to Shard Choice, losing someone that was going to recruit the Southeast was kind of a problem for them. So I think that's kind of what they were trying to fill, someone that could fill that recruiting role in some way. But I think it's really big that, Texas, there was a lot from the media talking about Keenan Hall, a whole lot early in that week, talking about, oh, Keenan Hall's top choice. Oh, Keenan Hall, this, it feels like it's going to be Keenan Hall. There was a lot of talk about that. And then as, a couple days go by, and then you start to see, oh, wait, no, it's not going to be Keenan Hall, going in many different directions. But I think for Baylor, the biggest thing is he's been an elite recruiter for this Baylor team. He's been an elite recruiter over the last year, and a really good coach as well. He got a whole lot out of Bryson Washington and Dawson Pendergrass last year, which was really impressive. I think that's going to continue. He's recruited at a very high level, as we saw with this recruiting class, landing 2 4-star running backs in Caden Knighton and Michael Turner. But his impact goes deeper than that. I mean, you look at the recruitments of, Taz Williams, Demetrius Brisbane, Kamarian Morgan, like, his fingerprints are all over winning those recruiting battles as well. So just a really good recruiter, someone that they really need to hold on to. And it sure seems like they're going to be able to hold on to at least during this offseason. We'll see how things progress. We'll see what, Keenan Hall wants to do in his future, kind of what his goals are long-term. But right now for Baylor to keep that cohesiveness for this staff, especially going into what is, again, expected to be a really, really big year, I think is huge, and fundamentally something that I think Dave Aranda really needed this offseason to really make sure all the pieces are still together and cohesive from the team that just went on that run last year.
Yeah, I don't know how much play he actually got with like actual Texas people. Like I understand the whole Twitter thing and their reporters and all that, but regardless of what it was, I mean, it's good to have your name mentioned, I guess. And you just don't want it to be all the time, though. Like you don't want it to be like constantly like, is he involved or not? So like to have some attention is good. I think it can also be distracting after a while as well. But when you got good coaches, they're going to get attention paid to them, and especially when they're good at recruiting, those folks are going to pay extra attention to those types of guys as well when big jobs open up. So yeah, he's going to be a wanted figure based on results. Yeah, for right now and for the foreseeable future, he's at Baylor, so that's great. And they've obviously done some good things, as you pointed out there. So that's one storyline from this past week. Also, how about wide receiver recruiting? And I wanted to take a look at the depth chart there.
Right. I wanted to just do a quick deep dive this past week. I talked a lot about the wide receiver position. We've talked about it some on this podcast as well, just the depth that isn't there. But I went back, looked through their recruiting classes, and I mean, the amount of misses or amount of just small classes they've taken, it's really piling up, Craig. I mean, like you think about this list. So since 2019, here are the guys who I would consider busts, or guys that haven't lived up to the potential or transferred out. Jalen Ellis, Yusuf Terry, Seth Jones, Elijah Bean, Javon Gibson. We haven't seen much of Cam Bonner. He's still on the roster, though. Jordan Neighbors, Armani Winfield, and then Micah Gifford, who just has switched positions this offseason. That is a huge chunk of the guys that they have recruited at the wide receiver position over the last 5 years. It's really led to this kind of problem where you look at the depth chart, and it's just very abundantly clear how much they're missing on the in-betweens, right? They have all these seniors because Josh Cameron, they got lucky with a walk-on really, turning into a really good player, and then their transfers. That's their senior group right now. But the juniors, they don't have a single junior wide receiver on the roster that's on scholarship. They have one sophomore in Jaden Porter, and then the rest are freshmen or redshirt freshmen, with Mason Dossett moving there from the safety position this offseason. But there's just this huge gap in the middle. And I'm wondering, as things move forward, kind of how does Baylor address that? But I think one thing that's become abundantly clear from this year's recruiting class is they're really trying to land outside receivers. And we talked about a few of them during this past season, whether it was, Micah Hudson or Nick Anderson or Noah Thomas. Like, we talked about some big outside receivers that they were looking at, but they weren't able to land them. And that's because they're highly wanted guys, especially once they're proven commodities on a college football field. So landing those guys early, I think, has become a very big focus for the Baylor staff. And I think that's why when you look at the guys that they're recruiting, whether it's a London Smith or a Jordan Clay, or Chase Campbell, Cohen Brown, they're recruiting guys that have the ability to play outside. Because I think they're trying to make sure that they have good depth at the outside receiver position for the future and make sure they don't have to rely on the transfer portal, because they've had so much success recruiting the slot wide receiver position out of the transfer portal. When you look at guys like Ashton Hawkins, or, this year you got Kobe Prentice, you got Cole Wilson, they've been able to find guys who kind of fit that role in the slot in this air raid scheme, but not so much on the outside. And so I think that's become a huge focal point for Baylor recruiting as they try to kind of fix what they kind of missed on in that one portion of time during these past, 5 years, 6 years. And now trying to allow the freshman class from last year to grow and develop, and then bring in another wave of really good wide receiver prospects as well, to make sure that, in the next, 2 years from now, they're kind of able to rely on that group and not have to rely so much on, okay, we got to go find this big alpha outside receiver, when it's been so much easier to find slot receivers in the transfer portal and bring in guys from the high school level that you develop. So it's just kind of one of those interesting storylines that I've kind of been looking at over the last, year, really, and seeing how they've been attacking the wide receiver position in this recruiting class. They have 4 4-star guys who are taking official visits this year, 4 of them at the wide receiver position. That's really impressive, and something that I think they're really, again, making a focal point for this class and in the future, because of how the transfer portal kind of played out this past year.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and it has been very hit or miss when it comes to the wide receiver recruiting, especially trying to get those big time outside guys. So yeah, I mean, great news to have the slots back. You feel really good about that position next year, but yeah, on that outside, I mean, it's been a long time since you had the Antoine Goodleys of the world and those kind of guys that were just streaking down the field, making big plays, or
Yeah.
even hitting you up underneath from time to time as well. But yeah, they just have not had that. Since, I mean, who, Denzel Mims or something like that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, Josh Cameron did some of
Josh
that last
Cameron.
year. Like, he had a
Yeah.
really good year, but I think in general, there hasn't been a pipeline of guys like that, right? You were kind of hoping Keatron Jackson would be that, maybe Hal Presley, and they kind of took turns being that, and it was fine. It was good enough, but I don't think it's where Baylor ultimately wants to get to, when they used to have, Denzel Mims, Tyquan Thornton, and then before that, it was just like, name them. Corey Coleman, Jay Lee, Antoine Goodley, like Josh Gordon, like they had all these guys who were just absolutely dominant on the outside. Katie Cannon, even as well, especially in his final year on the outside, he was elite. And so I think trying to get back to that is a big focal point, and kind of realizing how hard that position is to recruit out of the transfer portal makes this make a ton of sense, right? Where if you can bring in a bunch of guys who you can at least try on the outside, gives you far more options than taking guys that are strictly slot guys. I just don't know how much sense that makes.
No, yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting, and I think you're laying out of it makes a lot of sense, and something to pay attention to. So yeah, I mean, good to see them addressing deficiencies and figuring out ways to combat that, and to better that position, because it has been quite elusive for them the past couple of years to really nail that down. And yeah, I mean, who did you say? Denzel Mims, and who was after that?
Tyquan.
Yeah, Taekwon. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
Taekwon. Who, yeah, he was probably the last really good outside guy that they had, and Josh Cameron's good too. But yeah, I don't just think of him in that way. He's obviously return game effective as well, but just pure receiver. Yeah, um, that's been kind of missing. But they should be strong in the slot next year. I think that they should be mighty fine there. So if they can accompany that with some dressing on the outside, I think Sawyer Robertson's got some good things to look forward to there. All right, so wide receiver recruiting, kind of taking a different look at that. Anything else football wise that you want to touch on before we go this week?
I think the biggest thing right now is just with spring rolling around, you're going to have a lot of guys on campus for spring practices once those get rolling here in about it should be 2 weeks when they do start getting rolling. So you'll have a lot more visitors, a lot more recruiting information kind of popping out during that time period. Guys are scheduling official visits. If you want to see the full official visit list that we have so far, you got to go over to Sikkim 365 Premium, a really extensive list, a really, really impressive list, double-digit 4-star guys who will be officially visiting Baylor during the 3 June official visit time periods that Baylor has set up right now. Really impressive to see what Baylor's been able to do from a recruiting standpoint. And I think right now, the way this class has played out and the way kind of things are shaking right now, Baylor is definitely looking at a position where they could potentially end up being, a top 25 recruiting class if they're able to, take enough guys and continue on the trajectory that they're on. I mean, you could be looking at the best recruiting class Baylor has had since the national rankings have been coming out.
Yeah, I mean, that's exciting stuff. I am somebody who's gonna, show me when they get to the finish line. But I mean, as far as that having, the ability to talk about that and to be in that position is great. It's ultimately about where you finish, but you got to be in the position to finish in the right spot, and they're at least in position, which has not been the case the last couple of years, if not longer than that, when it comes to recruiting class rankings. So definitely a very nice start. Maybe the start of some new trends in terms of their recruiting and sort of where they find themselves. I mean, ultimately, we know it'll come down to wins and losses this upcoming season. That's how they'll really build true momentum and be able to build these types of classes and put them together back to back to back. But yeah, they're sitting really nice right now. So football should be getting word any day now about the start of spring ball, and so that'll be coming your way sometime the next few weeks, next couple of weeks. We'll definitely have something concrete to be able to pass along. And with that, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, honestly, if they scrap the spring game, it is no sweat off anybody's back. I mean, let's face it, this was never a fan base that packed for a spring game anyways. If they don't do a spring game, like, take aside like personal wants or whatever of like, hey, I really want to watch the spring game because I want to write about it. Like, take that out of the equation from just their perspective. Like, screw the media, screw the fans. Like, what's best for us? If they don't have a spring game, like, I would not be surprised. If they do, that's great. But I think we're seeing the trend around the country when the teams who pack 70,000 are like, nah, we'll do something else. Then I don't think a team that gets like 7,000 is going to sit there and feel like it's too much of a difference. But I don't know. I guess we'll see when they put out the schedule of what they plan on doing. I would assume they have some sort of like fan get together type of thing, but I really don't know based on kind of what we've seen around college football lately.
Right. It's kind of a wait and see. I just think it feels like things are trending that way for just about everyone. And so I don't know why that would really be entirely different for Baylor. So yeah, I think fans really, talk about loving watching it and seeing it, but you're right. Like, fans don't really show up for it. And so it's kind of like, what's the point of it? What's the point in giving, advantages to other programs, right? Because I mean, that's the reality of the world that we live in right now. I mean, if a guy goes out there and has 3 touchdowns in the spring game and it's on television, I mean, that they're gonna get, some sort of recruiting from other programs, some sort of, illegal communication, most likely. And that's just become the reality of college football. And so why would you put yourself in that position? Yeah, when you don't have to. So I'm kind of right there with you.
Yeah, and I feel like 2 of the most recent ones weren't even like public anyways because it rained. Like, what was it? Last year was indoor, or
Two,
was it 2 years ago? For sure
yeah.
was. And I think that's happened a couple times to where like they just canceled it and it's been in the indoor. So, um, like I don't want them to like shut down access to everything and just give them reasons to go behind closed doors for all of their stuff. But I don't know how many people will notice if they don't have a public like big to do about the spring, because I don't even feel like it's been a big to do anyways here lately at all. It's been like, this is the green and gold game, but like that's really all there is to it, right? I mean, it's not like the big jamboree like you used to see at Texas or the big sellout at Nebraska. It wasn't ever dressed up because they don't really have the fan base to do that, for one. Um, but it's been a while since it was like a big deal to be at a spring game. So I'll be curious to see what kind of approach they take, whether they decide to keep it private or say, "Come on, fans." But I guess we'll see when they release that here in the next few days. Meanwhile, while we await word on football and their plans for spring and whether or not they'll have a big fan, uh, game or whether or not they'll be kind of on the low. Baseball has been very active and very loud early on. Mitch Thompson's team 8-3 to start the season. Obviously got off to a really nice start. They've been very good at home. This past weekend, the competition, it jumped up a little bit, Grayson, as a part of the college baseball series. So over the weekend, you had, last Tuesday, you had the big win over, I said big win. Where are we at here in the calendar?
Stephen
Trying
F.
to figure out
Austin.
March 4th. Yeah, Stephen F. Austin. That's where I thought we were. But Stephen F. Austin last Tuesday beat them 9-4. They turned around and played in the college baseball series up in Arlington at the Rangers Park Globe Life Field. Lost to number 8 Oregon State 4-3 in a tight one there on Friday night. Then on Saturday, beat Ohio State 8-6. Sunday turned around and lost to number 25 Auburn 7-4. So they go 1-2, 0-2 against top 25 teams, and a nail biter there against Oregon State. They'll be back in action tonight against Tarleton, and then they play. Who the hell is LMU? Whoever LMU is. Oh, Loyola. I was thinking of Lon Morse. Yeah, Loyola Marymount. Haven't seen that logo very often. So, yeah, Loyola Marymount coming up at Baylor Ballpark on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for a full weekend series. So they're off to a nice start. Got challenged, definitely. Got a couple losses hung on them in the tournament up in Arlington. But what do you think about Baylor baseball thus far?
Much improved. I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from this stretch to start the year. They're 8-3 now, but I mean, the way that they're playing this year, they look, it's night and day over how they've been over the last 3 years. I mean, they've looked so much better. It's kind of disappointing that they weren't able to beat Oregon State or Auburn. You're kind of hoping maybe they could sneak in one of those just to help with, the RPI. As you kind of get closer towards the end of the year, you need these kind of bigger wins, especially because, let's face it, their non-conference schedule is very, very weak. I mean, the teams that they've played so far, Youngstown State, Gonzaga, even UTSA, Stephen F. Austin, just not very good. Tarleton is really bad. They play Sam Houston in a week, and they're really bad. And then over the weekend versus Loyola Marymount, I mean, that's a 7-5 team, but they haven't played anybody. They're not very good either. And so it's just kind of one of those things. They haven't really built up a very good tournament resume. And the Ohio State one, it looks nice. It's a big brand, but I think Ohio State's like 1-9 or 1-10 on the season. So they're really not that great either. And so just kind of trying to make sure that I'm not getting overboard with this team. I think they really need to find a way to go out and go 4-1 in these next 5 games to really cement themselves as, a really good team going into tournament play, a team that has a lot still riding on the line, a lot of postseason hopes. And then you enter Big 12 play, and there's some good teams in the Big 12, including the first one that they're going to play in Kansas, who I believe is sitting there at 11-1. So things are going to shake up when they end up entering Big 12 play. But in general, I mean, I don't see how Baylor fans could be unhappy with how they've played so far. I think this Baylor baseball program is finally showing signs of turning a corner, which is something they had to do this year. This was the year where they really absolutely had to take that next step and become a potential tournament team. And I think so far during this initial stretch this season, I think I can pretty confidently say that they should be pretty good the rest of the way and be competing for a tournament spot so long as they don't suffer a bunch of injuries.
Yeah, it's been encouraging to see a nice start, a little bit of excitement being built up by Mitch Thompson and company. So that's been good. Just got to keep it rolling now and take care of your midweek games. And we'll see how far they can take you. But certainly some signs of optimism early on for baseball. Meanwhile, the other diamond sport, softball, not so much. 10-10 now on the year, coming off the Baylor Invitational, where this past week they opened up play at Getterman Stadium with a 6-5 loss to North Texas, turned around and beat California Baptist, and then Sam Houston State, and then North Texas before falling to Cal Baptist in the final game there at the Baylor Invitational, 2-1. So a 3-2 weekend for them goes right in hand with the 10-10 record overall, just kind of right there in the middle. And they will play some team called Texas coming up on Wednesday, tomorrow. They will play them down in Austin. And then get Big 12 play this weekend at Getterman Stadium with the Kansas Jayhawks rolling into town for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series. So softball just kind of teetering right there in the middle, and Big 12 play starting up now for the girls out at Getterman.
It's been a rough start to the year for the softball team after such a good season last year. So yeah, 10-10, they need to start, making up some ground and start winning some of these games, because riding at 500 is obviously never going to be good enough in softball or baseball. They're really going to have to turn things around in conference play. So we'll see if they're able to get to that point, but it's been a rather disappointing year for them, unfortunately.
Yes. So there you go. There's a roundup of basically all that's going on right now. I know there might be a thing here or there, but it's pretty much all we got for you in terms of what's going on currently. Basketball is kind of wait and see mode on how they close on the men's side, and then how the conference tournaments go and how that plays into the seeding. Baseball, nice start. Softball, we'll see. But right now, just sort of no man's land there at 500. But there is a big story from this week we haven't touched on, and I want to do it here because I don't know how many questions we have. We might have one, we might have 10. I haven't even looked. But before we run out of time, I did want to comment on JJ Joe. I didn't know if you had anything to say, Grayson, but that kind of said my piece on the radio this past week. Very sad to learn about JJ Joe's sudden passing. Obviously, he was a contributor to SicEm365.com. He was a regular guest on our show on 365 Sports throughout the season, was with us pretty much every single week. And I always enjoyed his insight and always enjoyed listening to him and JMO, but particularly his passion and his excitement. His love for Baylor was very clear. We had Robert Griffin on, who was really great last week for like 45 minutes. And part of what he talked about was JJ Joe and like how much JJ Joe played a factor in Robert's career at Baylor and how it all played out. Of course, with the Heisman Trophy, like saying that there would be no Robert Griffin without JJ Joe, which was a cool comment, among others that he had. But he was very nice in what he had to say. Came across JJ several times. He wasn't like a hangout buddy for me because I'm just kind of that's not like really how I am. So I never like toasted beers with him or anything, but I saw him plenty enough and talked to him plenty enough to know what a swell guy he is and to really enjoy him and to really appreciate him and appreciate what he did, in the broadcast booth as a player. I mean, he's a Baylor legend, Baylor football. Yes, you start off by naming Mike Singletary and RG3, but I don't think it takes all that long before you eventually do get to JJ Joe. And he had a lot of people who loved him and enjoyed his work and just enjoyed him, had fond memories of him as a player. So I think it's awfully sad news, obviously, and our hearts are broken for his family and his friends. Can't imagine how shattered they must have been with such a sudden passing. And that's all my mind was focused on last week, was just like, man, I just feel so bad for his family and everybody who had to learn that news, because it was so sudden and so out of nowhere. And that's always hard to deal with. So JJ, man, we love you. Hope his family is doing okay, all things considered. And definitely going to miss him just in general. The website, the radio broadcast, and for a lot of people out there, just as their friend, right? Just their buddy or their husband or father, etc. It's a huge loss for the Baylor community. No two ways about that, man. And so RIP JJ Joe. And I just wanted to say something before we got in the mailbag and close this thing on out.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Craig. That was a perfect way to kind of surmise this situation. Really, really sad. Just when I heard this news, it was one of those things where you're just kind of jaw drops, right? Because you just don't expect to lose someone so young. And so as far as JJ goes, he wasn't a guy that I was actually able to meet in person, but he was certainly someone who I felt like I knew just from how many times I got to see him, on camera, see him with games, see him on the radio site, see him while editing his articles on the website. just a really, really tough situation, something that was really sad and definitely an eye-opening one. For me, just, that's, you see it every year, just how fragile life can be. And so losing someone who's a Baylor legend and someone who I know had such a great impact on so many people. I mean, you go to the premium side of our website, there's a huge thread of sadness about losing someone like him. And so, yeah, a really, really sad situation. And yeah, I'm praying for his family and for just anyone who's his friends as well. Really, really sad to see him go.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big loss, and I'm not sure how quickly everybody will be able to kind of um, come to grips and deal with it. It's different strokes for different folks, but this is going to obviously hit some people exceptionally hard, and it's hit a lot of people hard these past few days. So I definitely had to make mention of that and acknowledge the greatness of JJ Joe, and just tell him and tell his people how much we appreciated and loved him, and we're going to miss him. And so I think that thread on the board says a lot. So anybody that loves JJ, go visit that thread and see, all of the kind words. It's pretty cool to see that. But RIP, big man, and best of luck to you on the other side. Let's get in the mailbag. It's a short one this week. Only got a couple of questions, kind of where we are, just sort of between basketball regular season and start of football spring. I guess not a lot of wondering going on, except for about seeding and just everything else sort of up in the air at the moment. So not a lot of questions, but let's go to Matt Villain Bear 20. And I have nothing on this, but Grayson, how do you feel about ATO placing second and Sing?
I mean, it's really cool. That wasn't really the thing that wasn't really my thing. I mean, I did it just because it's part of just the whole experience. And I had a best friend who was, kind of big into the Sing world. And so it meant a lot to him. And I know it meant a lot to a lot of the guys who were in my fraternity when I was in college. I was more so into, intramural and recruitment. Those were my two things. Surprise, surprise with my current job now. But yeah, it's really cool to see them doing so well. I never got to place when I did Sing. We made pigskin, but that was about it. So yeah, it's cool to see. I think ATO won last year, the year before. So that was even cooler to see them actually win, because I don't think they ever had. So yeah, it's cool. It's a cool moment, I guess.
Bears are cool. 1, 2, 3, 4. What do you expect the spring portal to look like for Baylor? Do they take more than 5 guys?
I think a lot of that's going to come down to what happens during the spring season and just kind of how the roster shakeup happens when they extend it to 120, and just how Baylor utilizes that. If Baylor decides to go with that many guys, or if they keep it at 85, just kind of depends on what they're trying to do, and then that'll give them an idea of how much room they have. I would be surprised if they took less than 5 guys. I think you could see guys leave Baylor. You could see a shakeup like that. I think you could see maybe potentially other roster spots being added. I just think there's also the opportunity that guys don't perform in the spring who you think might perform, and you need to go out and find somebody and recruit over them potentially. I think that's another part of the equation as well. So lots of factors that go into this, but in general, yeah, I think they'll probably take, I would guess they'll probably take 5 or more. I would guess that at this point, even though I would say it's probably far too early to really know with any certainty.
And the only other question this week, H. York or York, either way, what are the chances women's basketball gets a 4 seed?
Craig, I have one more question to add from earlier this, or from 2 weeks ago, I guess, that we didn't quite get to. So I'll add it here at the end after we answer this one. But I think for the 4 seed line, the way this Baylor women's team has been playing, I think the odds are actually maybe a little higher than 50-50. I just think that they are really good. I think they're going to find a way to make it to at least the Big 12 championship game in the tournament. And so if they make it there, I think they're already kind of definitely in the conversation for a 4 seed. And then of course, if they win that game, I think there's no doubt about it. So yeah, I'll go with a little above 50%. I like the way they're playing. If they keep playing like this, I think they're going to go on a little bit of a run in the Big 12 tournament.
All right. So you had another question, you said?
Yeah, so it's 4 questions, but it's something that we missed from, I think, a couple weeks ago, or if we didn't have a show. But the first one is, what position groups do you see making the biggest leap next year?
You go right ahead here. I haven't seen these questions, so let me think about it.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, man, that it is a good one, right? To kind of look around the roster and see who's going to take that biggest step up. I have a feeling that the cornerback position under Paul Gonzalez, the guys that they brought in, guys kind of developing, Calvin Simpson Hunt coming in, Tevin Williams, Caden Jenkins developing, the younger guys developing. I just think they're going to be far better at the cornerback position. And I do think it was a position that wasn't very good last year. I don't think it was as bad as the safety group, but I do think that they've done enough this offseason to make me think that they could kind of make a push to being really good, especially with the coach that they've added as well.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a good candidate. I'm trying to think while you're talking there of what other groups would even really apply to make a big jump. I guess safeties would be another group that could stand to get a lot better. But yeah, with the coaching change, Paul Gonzalez, he's got a little bit of hype now. I mean, there's been a little bit of hype now built up for him, so he's going to have to try and live up to. I mean, it's not like there's wild expectations, but we're starting to hear his name a lot. So yeah, I think there's some excitement there about what he can possibly do, and that would definitely be a group that could feasibly turn around pretty quick in a year. But yeah, the whole secondary's got to be better than they were last year. I think that was clear. I wasn't even trying to like be negative in the post game press conference, but like the bowl game ends, and the last tweet that I think I ended up putting up was him basically calling out the secondary. And it's like I didn't mean to do that. I wasn't trying to like start stuff, but it was just like the last thing he said that I could put out. And then again, I looked back at it later on. I was like, well, that's kind of fitting. Like that's the last thing that you're left with was that comment, but that's where they need to get better the most. So yeah, that's where they have the most room to improve for sure.
Right. And then the next question is kind of in that same vein is what is the position group we need to make the biggest jump to win the Big 12? And I think this is the one that I would probably put for safety. And really, it's just the secondary in general. They got to get a lot better, but that safety group too many times last year just were hemorrhaging yards and points to other teams. And so bringing in Devin Turner, I think helps that, potentially moving around Carl Williams, you got Devin Bobby returning. You got some more options out there with Tyler Turner as well, who they got from the transfer portal, some young guys who they're trying to develop. So there's more options there. It's just a matter of kind of how does that all come together. But I do think safety is the group that needs to make that biggest jump this year if they're going to actually reach their goals of winning the Big 12. Because, I mean, that includes the star position. And that's a position that, we haven't seen dynamic play from that position since Jalen Petrie. And, it's kind of at the point now where, what is their type there? What do they want from that position? Because it's kind of been all over the place the last few years, whether it's a bigger guy who can tackle, a blitzing guy, a guy who can cover in the secondary. They've had all of it, but they haven't had one guy who's good at everything. And so the question is, do they get closer to that this year? Maybe bringing in Phoenix Jackson to be more of a run stuffer and a guy who blitzes. Maybe that could make some sense. Maybe Carl Williams goes back there and is just really good in coverage and improves as far as being a tackler. It's just very interesting to kind of see where they're at there. They have options, but I think they need to make that position a focal point as far as it actually being a playmaker.
No, yeah, I mean, I think you laid it out really well there. So yeah, secondary is where the focus is going to be. I think the start of spring, throughout spring, everywhere else, there's question marks a lot of places, but not nearly as much at corners and safety as there is. There's far more questions there than anywhere else on the team as far as starting up spring ball and just wondering what you have and what you'll have next season. So yeah, what other questions?
Newer players, recruits, or transfers that we should get to know before fall camp? Well, obviously we got to get through spring camp first, but fall camp is something that, when we get to that, we'll obviously have, more of an answer for that as well. But, I think if you're just kind of trying to lay it out, the transfers that they brought in, Samu Taumanu Pepe is one who I'm very intrigued to watch at the nose tackle position. They really need that one to work. They need that one to be, someone who is a dominant player for them up front. They absolutely need that from him. So he's certainly one that I'm keeping an eye on. Devin Turner at safety, very important. I would say the edge position, anyone they added there. Matthew Fobbs-White, Kamarian Morgan, Amarian Winston. Anyone they add at the edge position is someone to keep an eye on because they're trying to replace Garmin Randolph and Steve Linton from last year's team. So that's going to be a focal point. I'm intrigued by the linebackers with Travion Barnes coming in, wide receiver position, Kobe Prentice, Cole Wilson. Really excited to watch both of them at the wide receiver position, see how they kind of adapt, see if Taz Williams is 100% the dynamic 4-star freshman. See the running backs. I'm a big believer in Caden Knighton, who came in from the recruiting class, 2025 recruiting class, 4-star type running back. Very good speed, very different, I think, than the guys they have on the roster. I just think he's a special playmaker and a guy who could be a guy who makes a lot of noise as we enter spring football. So a lot of names. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but those are kind of the main ones I'm looking at. And then one that I mentioned earlier, Calvin Simpson, Hunt at cornerback. That's kind of the group that initially just stands out in my mind.
All right. Any other questions there to add on?
Yeah, one more is in the new Big 12. What are Baylor's recruiting advantages and disadvantages? This is his last one. I mean, I think location, I think scheme, I think the coaching staff, I think those are some huge advantages that Baylor has. Disadvantages, I mean, maybe NIL when it comes to competing against certain programs across the country. I don't think necessarily in the Big 12, but if you look across the country, they might have some problems with obviously your Texas or A&Ms or schools from the SEC. But I think in the Big 12, they're kind of up there. And so I think disadvantages are if you're not winning football games. I think that's where your disadvantages come in. But I think this offseason and really the last year and a half with their upgrades in facilities, them winning football games on the field, the coaching staff that they've put together, the relationships they've built, there are far more positives than negatives for Baylor when it comes to recruiting, especially compared to other Big 12 programs.
Yeah, they've got a lot going for them. Just win games. Like that's all it really comes down to. I mean, there's all these other things that are better or worse, but they all usually hinge on winning games. That makes up for a lot. I think their disadvantage is the size. I think the size is a killer for Baylor, and they've had opportunities to change that over the years, and they always seem to whiff on those moments of being able to like carry any amount of momentum. It's always like 2021 happens and then you just completely face plant the following year, the second half of the football season. It takes you like a year to recover from that. And now the fan base still hasn't recovered from that because they're so wishy-washy that like if you don't win 5 years in a row, they take 5 years to win back them sitting in the seats every Saturday. You know what I mean? So it's like you have such little fan base to begin with, and then they're so fickle. Like, and I don't mean that like in a overly negative way, but y'all know it's true. Like it's hard to win and keep them there. And like the moment it starts going sideways, it's like, I'm selling my tickets. You know what I mean? And so It's just like this constant uphill battle to just maintain, much less add on. And I feel like there's been this big window to add, but because of a scandal, because of coaching changes, because of like whatever, it's like they've missed every opportunity to build that. And so they've just stayed where they are. Ultimately size wise, if not maybe lost some size, like not as a student body, but as a fan base, as a hardcore fan base. And that's just where I think it's always going to be an uphill battle because other schools, it's just built in. A&M's just built in 40,000 people like every year are going to be at that school. You know what I mean? Whereas Baylor, like the student body is getting bigger, but it's not even necessarily football fans. It's like somebody just studying theology, or it's somebody who's doing sciences or whatever. And it's not necessarily the fan base growing. So to me, the fan base thing's the deal where I don't know how many more opportunities you'll have to really grow that. And that's where I feel like their biggest detriment is just in the size of the fan base at this point. Because when you talk about NIL, if you're going to the same 5 guys every single time and other schools have 15 guys, then that's going to wear on your 5 people when they're the only people you can continuously go to for every little thing that you need, especially when you're about the school's going to start paying players. Well, who do they go to? They go to the same 5 people. Let's go to the Fudge family again. And let's go to it's the same people. And thank God for them. But other schools have like 10 more of those people, if not 20 more of those people. And so that's just that's an uphill battle that you can't really do anything about. You do the best that you can with it. But when we had Mac Rhodes on lately, I mean, he brought that up. He's like, you can only ask your donors for so much when we're as small as we are, you know? And so that's where you're just never going to be on par with Texas or A&M in this new landscape. Those days are gone. And now it's a matter of like, can you stay on par with Texas Tech, and can you stay on par with Oklahoma State and whoever? And so far, so good. But time will tell, because I think the next few years, like, who the hell knows, quite frankly, once all of this goes into effect and schools start paying players. There's some people that believe that there'll be some schools that do it initially, and then they go, we can't keep doing this. Like, this isn't, we're going to have to go back to just being a college sports institution. I don't think Baylor will be one of those. I think they'll try and last as long as they possibly can, but they are up against the wall due to their size more than anything else in my mind.
I agree. I think that's definitely their biggest detriment and biggest hurdle. Yeah, and just not having a huge alumni base, like you mentioned, that can definitely wear on you, especially in this new era of college football. So they're battling that. They've done a nice job of it, like you mentioned, so far, and we'll see if they're able to continue that. But so far, so good, especially with the way that this 2026 class is looking and the way that I expect Baylor men's basketball to recruit when it comes to the transfer portal. I still think they're going to have a ton of success there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing the best with what they've got, doing a lot better than probably people even expected. And so, yeah, just keep chopping wood, and hopefully, you'll chop down some championships along the way. We saw women's basketball right there with an opportunity to do that. Just fell short. Men's basketball probably not in the cards, but we'll see how they finish. And we'll be talking about their Big 12 tournaments, seeding and whatnot next week, and we'll see what all the bracketology is saying at that point. Obviously, football right around the corner, some big investments there. They've got everything else. Like, it's just it's going to be hard to overcome the size thing. That's just part of the deal. The same thing for TCU and SMU and schools like that. But outside of that, they're doing pretty well. So, Grayson, anything before we go out this week?
Just be sure to check out Sikkim 365 Premium. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming for spring football, some new content that we're going to be releasing, some trials. So be sure to watch out for that. If you've never been a premium subscriber before, watch out for some of the trials that we're going to be having as spring football gets closer here. And students, be sure to get a Sikkim 365 membership as soon as you can. It's free. So as these trials start popping out, be sure that you're on the lookout for that, because if you're a Baylor student, I don't know why you wouldn't want to have a membership at a time like this, when Baylor football is about to get rolling, when Baylor men's basketball transfer portal is about to get started. I would be on the lookout for that if you are a student. We'll have more releases about that in the coming weeks, but something to definitely keep an eye on.
Yeah, and would love to see some of the younger folks sign up and be a part of the website and be a part of that growing of the fan base that I just referred to, where there's more students, but it hasn't necessarily translated into like needing 60,000 seats filled up at the stadium. So maybe join up on Sikkim 365 and catch that fire, and be the next hardcore donator to Baylor football one day eventually, or at least the next big fan of Baylor football. So yeah, we'll get into the weeds for those that want to do that here over the next few weeks when it comes to spring ball and March Madness and all the rest. And appreciate everybody that's along for the ride, and definitely appreciate those who are jumping on board maybe for the first time, but looking forward to what the rest of the spring entails. Good to be back, and we should be pretty regular, I would think, from here on out. We'll see how it goes, but good to be back with you, Grayson. Thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well, and we will talk to you next Tuesday live at 11 a.m. on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page, or after the fact on your favorite podcast platforms. But if you're on the YouTube page, please hit that like and subscribe button. That goes a long way in helping out the channel. So thank you for that. And until next time, for Grayson Grundhoefer and Garrett Ross, I'm Craig Smoak, and this has been the BearCast on Sikkim365.com.